Okay. And then this word now here in the verses 27, the primal substance, as they say, and that which has been called the self, do not arise designedly and do not think I will become. For that which is not born does not exist. So what's called were to come to be. So this is like a little bit linked with Islam religions. So as Buddhists, as Buddhists, we do not accept such kind of self, which is the, like, how could say, who are the main kind of, basic, or everything arises by the self or created by the self or it comes from the self, etc. We don't believe. The Buddhism, the self is we cannot find. So this is one of the Buddha's very special kind of new Buddha's wisdom. So in the Hinduism, the before Buddha's time, the few thousand years they already exist in some the religions, and they have been talking that when they are concerned of all these things where they can, how they can, and then they talk about some religion says it comes created by the this God, and some people says it comes through they call about this man self, big self. So, and why they're talking about this up there, all the sufferings and etc. Buddhist says that everything comes without any kind of arrangement, but only when the circumstance that they come, it arises. And there's no such kind of, arrangement there. So now in the Hinduism, they talk about such kind of that kind of creators. So creators, they talk about self, the self. They talk about in here the one special, like one of the highest kind of philosopher of Hinduism that we call Trungchenpa. Trungchenpa means this counting, all the kind of, how you say, the samsara and the nirvana, they explain into 25 different kind of aspects. And there they talk about the main one, chief one. And here they say, I think, primal substances. That is the self. One of that religion, they believe the self is like totally permanent, and one they believe the self they call more consciousness. So this comes through we need to explain something, what this why appears. Then they're not all these gross ones are not really existing. There are no such things. But when they come to the very in the subtle levels, and then they have to say something, how they appear. So the Mahavira Chen and great Indian masters saying that they are kind of the fear of the emptiness. They cannot say that this comes from the emptiness. So they cannot kind of accept it. So therefore, then they talk something. It comes from the, create gods or the self and etc. So therefore, this one of them, this non-Buddhism, they call it Tongchenpa, and another called Rinpoche. Rinpoche means more the logic ones. And they talk about the things has such created, some of created. And they created of the self, the self such is like kind of, it's existing itself, nothing dependent on anything. and also the permanent. So this is never ever be accepted in Buddhism. So in the 9th chapter, it will talk very clearly about how they are talk about self, the non-Buddhism self and Buddhist self things. It will come in the how I should say that in the ninth chapters. However, so this Tongchenpa, they talk about the main of this 25, they call like how should say, like very basic, in the maybe I think in the our Buddhist we talk about this ground consciousness, like we call ground consciousness. And that doesn't mean this ground consciousness is also permanent or something, but relatively we accept ground consciousness. Little bit like that, ground consciousness there, all the consciousness is arising from ground consciousness. Similarity, like there, the self and the first of these Tongchenpa, who are counting of the all phenomena in 25 ones, their self and then that what's called primal substances are more they think of the little bit consciousness, more like mixture of the mind. This other called Rikpa, that they call the self is just permanent. So now they were saying that if you are saying so like what the non-Buddhism talking about, they created, such kind of self, and that makes all this, suffering and anger and etc. And that is also incorrect. Here are saying that is not also incorrect. So what she said, Daji Tapa Koyimate Chuden, Dan Novala Soba Shavisha, Joma Shavishinas, Yavishina, Teche, the something Joma Mete, Mashi Bishop. So anyway, both the self and chief, they call I think primal substances, and these are they don't accept. They are the dependent on something. They are nothing dependent. They are like individual. They talk about independent. They are permanent. So now what they are saying is that even if you say that all sufferings comes from those, this permanent things like that, and he said that is incorrect because itself is never arising because they are not cause and condition. What we need to know is that whatever existing, it has to be cause and condition, It has to be cause and condition. Such that there's no cause and conditions, then they cannot change, they cannot make anything. So now what they're talking is that the self and the what's called permanent substances, and these things are what they accept is they are nothing dependent on anything. So therefore, they were saying is that they are never arising themselves, because they doesn't have such kind of cause and conditions, firstly. So if someone never arises, and how they can create something else, to make anger or suffering and etc. So here main question is like that. So what is your conduct? Daji conduct, Deni down in John, she checked something, John met, Mashipan, Demena, Deseshivan over Consul. So here saying of that, do not think I will become for that which is not born, does not exist for themselves. The self and permanent substance itself is not existing. So therefore, you cannot say these are the such kind of to the creators. Okay, that was because the one thing is that they talk about this, they are permanent. You know, that was their own kind of permission, their own logic. This both self and this permanent substances are the permanent. That was they really view. So such permanent, you cannot give anything, or you cannot arise itself. You know, in Buddhism, whatever arises, it has to be impermanent, and it has to be with many circumstances. So they talk about they are very permanent without any circumstances. You know, they don't need any circumstances, but they are more creators. They are more creators. So now we Buddhists, they reverse that. They are never arising, firstly, because they are permanent, because they have no causal conditions. So such, you know, if you can say they are arising or they give some kind of cause and results, again they can become then impermanent. You know, sometimes they give cause and sometimes they give result, sometimes, you know, we cannot say such someone gives result and at the same time it is permanent. You cannot say. So therefore, you cannot give any kind of circumstance because you are not impermanent. You know, if say that give something, then become impermanent, then become dependent on circumstances, then become there is not like such they call the self-power, and you have become, you know, dependent on something. So therefore, that kind of self-creators are also is not a no, we cannot kind of accept it. And the yella thought the inji being gaban jama minus. The next one is that the two with the yella long shape shinas. Then they're talking about, you know, so and that this what called this pyramidal substances, right? Pyramidal substances. That the two with the yella long shape. So they're talking about that, you know, in the non-religions, non-Buddhist, that self is something that you are like who really enjoying of all these objects, you know. They're talking like a little bit logic also, you know. There's like we have a lot of things, and the self who are, you know, like enjoying with this, like who really, you know, enjoy of this. So with the visual long switches. And then this pyramidal substance is more like they're talking about objects, you know, who are like linked with this self. So the self who are enjoying of this object. So then Shenri Deva was saying this next two sentences, actually this I will stop here, this and permanently what's called drawn towards its object. It can never cease from being souls. Minus. So this is like also refused. So then what they're talking is that the self which they talk about permanent. So Shantin Deva says that self, when they are really, the self is like someone who enjoy of the object, okay? Then there's nice sound. If this self, when they're linked with that sound, then you have to have all the time that sounds. You know, you cannot have one time there's sound, one time there's forms, and like that. You cannot, because the belief of that self is impermanent. Self is, if the self is permanent, you know, and if they're permanent, then they cannot be changed. Sometimes they hear sounds, sometimes they see the forms, and like that. That is impossible if you are permanent. Permanent means always has to be same, never change at all. That we call permanent. So now what they are talking is that if you distorted your eyes to the form, for instance, the self linked with the form, then you have to be all the time that, you know, they cannot be seized because this cannot be changed. That was your view, you know. So logically, they cannot really kind of accept such things. So same thing also, if you are holding of your enemy, then you have to be all the time with that enemies. They cannot change because of the self is the permanent. Gapa manjers, yodata vijitela inwajirate, njet tabishiro, ta keno, ongadan, yuba yon manjete. Okay, that is the kind of same things. Anyway, a little bit like that, okay? Oh, that is one thing. Not know what you that is again also this, I think that non-Buddhism self, but it will talk more in the other chapters. Dechen ripache da tapar sembar mepari kim no par gopin chepi tenri da de chujen no sen tenji ba mepa ngembar ta chite tanana de tabisha nangka no. Then I think next one is that another non-Buddhism, and they're talking about that self is such kind of without any mind. This above one is like self, and this what called pyramidal substances. They are kind of this pyramidal substance object, and that is more like subject, like mind. But their problem is that they talk about they believe that it's very permanent. But other one, they talk about that self is just permanent without any mind. So then Shantideva says, even those ones, if they said there is creator something, anger or happy and joy, by this self, and that is also not incorrect. So no sense intention about mebatas because they do not have such kind of mind, harmful mind, or they make some kind of give circumstance of the harmful mind. Why? Again, same things, because of the permanent. Such permanent, you cannot give any kind of actions. So in Buddhism, we talk about permanent is also one example is always used. Space is permanent, always there. There's no such kind of growth and rest and things like that. The permanent means something unchangeable. That is the definition of the permanent. So therefore, such unchangeable things, they cannot give any kind of circumstances. And then if those kind of teachers made it possible to say that even self is impermanent, but when there's some circumstances come, then it gives, when they come together, it gives some kind of result. If you say something like that, and then Shantideva said that is also impossible, because actual things, Rongchen Jiva, so nature is supposed to be unchanging. Such a nature unchanging things, no matter how many circumstances around, they cannot change. They cannot change because the nature is unchanged, right? Unchangeable. So fire's nature is what? It's hot. We cannot make this hot is something else, As long as the fire there must be always hot. That is the nature of the fire. So the nature of self is unchanging. So no matter whatever circumstances are there, they cannot be changed. So therefore, they cannot make kind of difference because of your nature is unchanging. The change in the membership is saying, nothing hands and lay Majana change shape, tell a par, number chiva, chichi, mandala. Anyway, that is like how they are refused. So that is the text, in the root text says that indeed the self is permanent, because their belief of that is permanent. It's certainly in it like space itself. There must be, I think, Nankayan, like space, because of the permanent. And should it match with other factors, how could they affect it? Since it is unchanging. So Buddhist, the definition of permanent is unchanging. Example is space. Okay, then there's two verses, that if when condition act, that they are talking about, if this self is permanent, but if the condition comes, act on it, it stays just as it was before. Okay, that cannot be changed, anything with conditions. If you say the condition makes change, what influence have these conditions had? They say that these are agent of the self, but that connection could there be between them. Okay, it's clear? Yes, of course. Right? And then, okay, we have little chapter. That is more essential. They only there kind of essential of summarized, I think, summarized with the above things. Data she got to have a move on years, data move on the end on the Joan, Jan of the Hama, they only shown that they are wrong by Mammy Tatu wrong. Jenny move on Mosaba data Hini, then Mammy by Jimon. That is very important, very important one. And all things that depends on other things, and these likewise depends, they are not independent. Knowing this, we will not be annoyed at things that are like magical appearances. So all this like Buddhist mind and way of thinking. Everything dependent on something. So people's anger is dependent, our own anger is dependent, object is different, subject is dependent. So there's no such kind of the creators and no such kind of also permanence. So as long as we understood these things, when we know really clearly everything dependent on something, so there's no such really truly existence. There's no such all the time it's a very, very bad person or very, very good person. I think that is also very much dependent on many ways, many ways. So good and bad is way of the thinking, okay? Good and bad is also very much like my mind. If my mind is very pure, then all of you guys I see very pure. Such Bodhisattvas and Buddhas. Right? Okay. So therefore, here they're talking about everything is dependent, to come one after another. So they think there's nothing truly kind of existing. So therefore, if you realize all these such things, then we are talking about also magic. We are talking about everything is like dream. We are talking about everything as illusion. These things are also appear. These things that we maybe understand. Illusion or what you call that, I think mirage and these things appear something. But when you really look into that, there's nothing like that. Ancient time, the Chandrapurti, they use a lot of elephants and horse, they're like arts horse. They make, magicians, they make these things like really ones, really elephants, looks like really elephants. Everybody thinks as elephants, but when you go close and there's no elephant, that we call illusory. So all phenomena, when we really look into, we don't find. When we talk about these things, or we will talk also more, like our body, like our speech, like our mind, or into the anger itself, desire itself, when we really look into, we don't find. But when we look far away, this looks like is there something, because of the circumstances. So therefore, if this mind, or if this around circumstance become more improved as good way, then it manifests in good things. manifest good things. Such kind of joy, happy, compassionate, such things. But then this mind also circumstance a little bit kind of wrong way of thinking and such things, then it manifests a little bit different way. So therefore, I think yesterday, samsara or nirvana, or these are the best on this mind, as long as good habit tendencies means that we are collector of the good way of the thinking and understand of the circumstances and interdependent originations, and that way we can build on also our own mind, and that way we can build on the quality of the mind too. Good mind and quality of the mind. So that is the whole that meaning, okay? And then here another kind of somebody saying that maybe that is not correct, and then Shantideva gives like answer, it is correct, and then what they're saying is that if these are the everything is like illusory, is like a dream, then they are asking, then what point, who is the antidote of the suffering, or why we are applied of the antidote for the suffering, or virtue, and etc. If someone is saying like that, then the answer is that relatively there is hatred, there is anger, there is object, relatively. So therefore, with this anger, if it can be possible based on the anger or rely on the anger, can be cut off the all suffering, because the tolerance is the one of the highest quality of the collecting of the merit. And that is only comes through the hatred, through the object of the hatred, okay? So therefore, if someone rely on the practice of the, or dealing with anger relatively, and it is also, how we say, that possible, Dungaji Cheban Juvan Dobi, Maripa Meji Gelana Kedan, Tamji, Jenny Shiba, Toa Doba Maripa. So that is one thing. Then other thing is that we believe of the everything is circumstances. And because of that also we kind of apply of the antidote of the anger, and remove of the anger is also very okay for the Buddhism. But if someone, they accept such kind of that anger or self is permanent, and then there is anger, there is antidote and such things, those are difficult. No matter how much you apply yourself, the self is permanent, they cannot change. So therefore, no matter how much you apply some kind of antidotes, and there is no way to apply your things, and such like that. If the self is permanent, if you are like God or good ones, you are always good. If you are bad ones, you are always bad, So there's no other way. So therefore, okay, here is such things like that, okay? So resistance, you may say, is out of place, where for what will be opposed, by whom the stream of sorrow is cut through by patience. There is nothing out of place in our assertions. Okay, assertions. I think then one more thing, okay? And now it's like this one big subject is conclusion. David down. Okay, Davam Ronde, Maripa Cheban Tomajana, Maripa Dundana, Rom Mayande, Jen Chuto, he data, sent Deva, the Yunchuba maybe, no, so, and then this is very good. If enemy, if your friend, whatever does something that unpleasant things, what we should need think is that we should think of all this comes from the circumstance. No one has such really power, It comes by the circumstances. When you are the wrong mind, because there is no such powers, when the circumstance comes, and it comes. So Jenny Jodo, he did the same. So we need to think, oh, he is very angry with me because of that circumstances, He or he has such circumstance to really strong anger today. So we need to think like for her or her or him anger, not like that person. So they are now like the mind is now messed up. If we think of like that, we try to like protect ourselves and also kind of give good circumstances for them to melt of the their anger. And this is the way of the Bodhisattva. They wrong to Vandrika Chenangayo, wrong the So if he or she has such power and no one has really such wish to have such kind of suffer of the anger or messed up the mind, but no one has such kind of power. So therefore, we need to be more patient and compassionate. Okay? And that text is what? Thus, when enemies or friends are seen to act improperly, remain serene and call to mind that everything arises from conditions. If this could be according to their wish, no suffering would ever come. To anyone of all embodied beings, for none of them wants pain of any kind. It's very true, right? So I think the way of thinking is really important. Okay, so maybe it's dinner time. We need to